should be making a video. Draft physics, draft science, and such. Comment some more and see where it goes from there. Maybe we'll do another science please video. Maybe. I found James Clifford. So if you believe anything matters, I don't know. Another troll account, I guess. Flux particle theory is the most likely fit. Well, who cares? Frankly, it looks really complicated to me. It looks like a bunch of funny shapes and a bunch of motion again with no description of how that motion takes place. So I don't see anything about it that screams, oh yeah, that's got to be the answer. It doesn't say that to me. And the Wooter says to himself, no doubt, it's all troll behavior, who is that? Another physics denialist wanker. So again, you're a denialist if you don't accept their incredibly weak evidence. Again, the Eddington experiment never repeated as performed anyway. Never end this with the same detail or specifications or standards, high standards. You know, so we just are to accept. They say, we did it to the gravitational waves. Do you really think there's any real hard evidence that they did anything? I mean, you know, you just keep accepting it on faith. You know, and that's religion. Are you sure he's not just someone that watched Back to the Future one too many times, like shitbird here, or whatever that means? Obviously, I don't believe in time travel, so you're the one with the wacky entanglement theories. You know, because of a tiny statistical difference, you think you have enough evidence to state something like there's particles that are entangled and they're communicating faster than the speed of light on that shit as evidence. And it is shit. Alright, Robert Ritchie. There's a theoretical particle, a very small mass, charge. I mean, the two things, mass and charge, are different. So, you know, no point. Called an axion. Yeah, by who, by what, who cares? They have lots of particles, positrons and neutrinos and lots of things that they don't really have any hard evidence that any of that crap exists. And coincidentally, this fits Gary's... I'm sorry, I wish you wouldn't say these things, because I don't think you understand my model at all, frankly. Matter-bit theory. I don't really think it does. I've already explained it. I mean, I don't need to explain it any further. We have forces that exist. Gravity is a force. Magnetism is a force. Light is a force. And they all move at the same speed, and they all have a quanta of energy to them. And they all move in straight lines. You know, their angles can be changed, but they travel from point A to point B in a straight line. From things they interact with, from matter bit to matter bit, they travel in straight lines. So this axion wouldn't have anything to do with a matter bit. Matter bits don't have speed of light velocity, so you really don't understand what I've been saying at all. I believe the most modern physics is correct. Well, then you're a dupe. What is most of modern physics? Most of modern physics is silly crap like relativity that assumes you can frame yourself and pretend that you don't have a real velocity, and that somehow by putting yourself in multiple frames you can travel faster than the speed of light, which is nonsense, or that you can do this aging thing in some special way when really it's just cryogenics. The whole thing is a pile of crap. So the gravity theory is bullshit. There's no explanation of the force. The magnetism theory is bullshit. There's no explanation of the force, the energy. Where does it come from? What causes it? How does it manifest? No explanation whatsoever. They say things overtly like virtual photon. They say things overtly like Huygens, which is an infinite number of little waves. You think most of that is correct? Then you're an idiot. Sorry, frankly, you're an idiot. There's no reason to think any of that is correct. It's wacky, extraordinary claims. Entanglement, you think that's a legitimate claim? Grapefruits with 2 million solar masses. You think that's correct? I mean, the whole thing is crap. Anyway, However, there are gaping holes in the basic fundamentals. Well, again, so you don't see the contradiction in those two statements. Mostly correct, but gaping holes. But, this doesn't make any sense. It can't be mostly correct if it has gaping holes in the foundation. That's non sequitur kind of material of modern physics theories. Also, a good physicist should be skeptical until proof is provided. No, this word proof isn't very useful. For what they really want, though, is strong evidence. Hard, reliable, dependable evidence. Experiments. And they don't have that. They just jump the evidence, as I've stated over and over again, and anybody who has any intellectual integrity has to concede or admit that they have, in fact, jumped the evidence. They are reaching for conclusions, okay, and they're not waiting for the evidence. That's not exactly an accusation of horrific crime. I'm not accusing them of some, wife beating. I'm just accusing them of not being what they should be, which is disciplined scientists. They should wait for the evidence. Provide a proof. Skeptical until proof is provided to prove. I mean, that's sort of a, not a great sentence. A theory is a law of physics. Again, they don't call them laws. They say Huygens principle or some other bullshit. They have interpretations, the Copenhagen interpretation. So they leave it open. But the very fact that they are wishy-washy, the very fact that they accept something called wave-particle duality as an answer, is just a demonstration that it's really crappy physics. Alright, Wooter. There's another theory called try reading a book on physics. So again, like a book on physics is going to explain these contradictions. And it doesn't. Is a book on physics going to explain whether photons have a wave function, individual photons, and then they interfere with themselves, or whether different photons somehow create a wave function and then interfere with each other? Is there a physics book somewhere that explains that contradiction? Oh no, there isn't. So more horse shit that somehow reading a book is going to make a difference, or it's going to answer any of these fundamental questions. Is the book going to explain why the pattern in light is very different than the pattern in electrons? Well, why don't you reference to me the book that explains that contradiction? Please. Why, when they use buckyballs, don't they use a detector to detect which slit the buckyball goes through? Buckyballs are big. You hit them with a few photons, ain't going to matter. So why don't they do the experiment by detecting the buckyballs? Is there a book somewhere going to explain these unanswered questions? Why hasn't the Eddington experiment ever been successfully repeated? Are they going to answer any of these questions? Can you cite the book that answers these questions? Oh, that's right, you can't. You're such a duplicitous asshole. Yeah. Alright, so I just block him. Alright. Science, please. I wrote a response comment, but it's too long for the YouTube to process it, so I'll put it in this view-only Google document. Cool. Okay, thank you. I'll go to that after I finish the comments. Treasure trove. This idea of any destructive or constructive interference, I don't know, there's no comma. What experiment proves that what experiments have you done demonstrating any constructive or destructive interference? Demonstrating that that's the actual cause. So as I've pointed out with the radar experiment, there can be other explanations, like the simple explanation of signal jamming. And I would argue that in the two-slit and single-slit explanation, that surfaces are what's causing the phenomenon, and that's just the pressure that the electrons are under changes the angle. It's just diffraction, surface diffraction. I've sort of pointed it out, but I mean, there's two ways to look at a surface, right? You go through a surface this way, and transparent surfaces will, depending on their gravity, their weight, deflect the light. More the heavier they are, the denser they are. I'm just pointing out that, well, the truth is they probably also do it when you run across the surface this way. And that's what's causing the single and double slit patterns. Now, what is so outrageous about that speculation? Why is that speculation forbidden? If you state it, you're somehow a horrible, awful, terrible person because you've stated a proposition that might explain the experimental results. And how is that a horrible crime? All right, go ahead and stick some chocolate in your microwave. So again, like microwave ovens are an example of anything but bouncing off the surfaces, which they're designed to do. The microwave is built to do exactly that, reflect the microwaves in the box, not let the microwaves escape. You see destructive troughs. So again, no you don't. You just see rays. Okay, the rays come out of the gun in a certain way and they reflect inside the box and they land in certain patterns that'll create patterns. Yeah, it's not a big surprise. You can even deduce the speed of light using this experiment. Says you. You've been pointed this out already, among many other things. That microwave ovens are a good way of deducing the speed of light. I don't think so. I don't think so by a long, long, long shot. That's just crap. So fuck you in this. Something's been pointed out. Show me the microwave experiment that where you can obviously see how fast light is. It's just nonsense. And then prove to me, show me proof that microwaves are constructively and destructively interfering. I mean, show me that the rays, show me some reason to think that the rays of microwaves, the straight line rays that come out of one end of the microwave oven, wouldn't, just by the odds of reflection, create pattern. They're coming out as a pattern. Of course they're going to produce pattern, unless you can randomize them. So I mean, if they made the box uneven, with a bunch of folds in it or something, then they could probably reduce that amount of pattern by creating more random scatter, random-like scatter. Alright, so whatever. Garbage comment. Spam folder. Alright, Wooter. Hey, love the show. I think you're great. Just wanted to clarify some confusion. So just more garbage, just time wasting. Look, I'm almost a comedian. No, you're not even close to a comedian. Wait, you think that's really funny? Ha 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 ha. Oy. If the double slit experiment has 5 times as many dark bands, who says so? I don't remember anybody. I don't remember me ever saying so. Does that mean the photons are communicating with each other? I don't know what that means. No, it just means that there's angles. The angles are always just multiples of each other. 3 degrees, 6 degrees, 9 degrees, 12 degrees. It's not complicated, the pattern. It's the simplest pattern you can create and call it a pattern. How do they know not to go to those dark bands when a second slit opens? Well, again, you said you've done this second slit opening experiment. Well, where have you done it? Where's your evidence? Because opening something is as tricky as anything else you're doing to something of these tiny scales. And as I've pointed out, clearly what matters is the distance of the slits, whether there's an impediment or an opening. The distance between the two slits. So clearly the two slits are communicating with each other in the sense that they are electrons, and the electrons do create force. They repel each other. I don't know whether you heard about that, but electrons don't like each other. And the pressure is how they reveal their dislike for each other, is by creating something called pressure. The example would be the glass, right? The reflective index of the glass changes as you change the thickness of the glass. And it cycles from 0 to 16, to 0 to 16, to 0 to 16. So as you make the glass a little bit thicker, you keep changing that index number, and it always recycles back to 0 again, back to 16. Now that would be something like if I had a little row of jelly beans and I had two surfaces between the two jelly beans, right? So I have all the jelly beans end to end, and then I compress them a little bit. Well, what's going to happen to the jelly beans? Some of them can't be flat anymore. Some are going to have to tip up, or they're going to have to move. And the same thing happens in glass. So as you polish the glass, you end up polishing atoms off the surface, and you're changing the surface of the glass as you polish it, and the atoms will sense that and move, and they have to adjust to each other to create the matrix that is the glass structure, the crystal. They're all connected. All the atoms are connected to each other. So you move one atom, all the other atoms have to readjust. So that's what's happening inside of glass, and that's what explains why the surfaces change. Both surfaces change as you change the thickness. So the two surfaces, in a sense, do communicate, just like the two ends of the jelly beans do communicate, in the sense that the two ends, if I compress how much space they can occupy, I'm going to make those jelly beans pop up a little. They're going to change their orientation. Now, you can't understand that simple argument, and that simple argument somehow violates some sort of ethical rules. You're not allowed to speculate on causes that aren't within your regime. So anytime I mention anything that's outside of the faith you have, and it's just faith, like I said, you don't have any hard evidence proving any of the crap you're stating. Your Huygens has no evidence. Where's your evidence that any of the crap you say is happening in the two-slit is the truth? That's right, you don't have any evidence, and your own physicists can't even figure out whether it's Copenhagen or many worlds, or the universe just happens to be random all on its own. It just made up this idea of doing random things. I mean, you're just such a fucking piece of shit to argue this crap in this crappy manner. You have weak evidence, and here you are being an obnoxious, authoritarian troll for nothing but a pope. Nothing better than a religious theory. Alright, how do they know not to go to those dark bands when the second slit opens? So again, nothing goes to any dark bands when the second slit opens. Obviously, when you change the pressure, the charge, the relationship between the surfaces, then you're going to change the angle that the light will travel to. And it's that simple. You're changing the pressure the jelly beans are under. Is that really so complicated for you? You can't understand that these atoms of these structures you build to control these photons, that these structures would be made out of atoms, and those atoms are made of electrons and protons, and that the electrons and protons are always in pressure or tension with each other? You really don't get that? Is that logical? Well, obviously what you say isn't logical, but the fact that they affect each other is perfectly logical. Just like if water's uncompressible, I can create pressure in water at one end, and the pressure will migrate through all the atoms to another end. There's nothing miraculous about that communication. Maybe photons are like spirits. No, that's your speculation, right? I'm not bringing up any spirits or any magical functions. I'm just saying to you, we already know that electrons are highly affected by each other at great distances. This is already a known fact. There's no spirits involved in what I'm speculating. So why are you perverting it? Why are you such a liar? It sounds like pantheism to me. Right. I'm the one saying there is no entanglement, there is no superluminal speeds. I'm the one saying there's none of these things. Your theory is the one that's saying there are these things. Why not call your channel DraftScience? Because it has nothing to do with daftness or seancing. It has to do with the fact that I'm sitting on a planet, an idiocracy, with a bunch of trolly douchebags who have really no knowledge of anything, and they just believe. They somehow just believe what people tell them. They don't want to understand it. They don't want to see the evidence. They're just saying, well, that guy thinks they're guilty, so it must be guilty because he says it's guilty. That's all you have. And then even when your stupid icons say right to your face, particle, light's a particle, not a wave. You don't pay any attention at all. I mean, you're just such a piece of shit. I mean, you really are just such a piece of human garbage. Garbage. That's what your life means. It's garbage. You're just a time waster, a liar, a piece of scum. Die with that on your grave, you piece of garbage. Alright, enough of that. So, we already did that one. So, back to the comments and off to this link. And if if he didn't, if it's not there, then we'll just go to one of his other videos. Oh, look at this. Miles and miles. Oh, no, not too much. Okay. So after such extensive commentary on what I wrote previously, well, I don't think my commentary was more extensive than the content you wrote in your comment. Okay, you made a lot of accusations in your comment, and I countered your accusations, butthole. I kind of feel like I should write a follow-up comment. Well, will it have any physics in it? Will you answer any of my questions? In the interest of time and to avoid as much repetition as possible, well, there won't be any repetition if you answer my questions because no one's done it. So you'll be the first one. I'll restrict my considerations to the portion of your video where you comment on the introductory video. Oh, well, that's just so disappointing because I really want you to comment on the questions I asked. I'd rather you answer my questions about the fundamental experiments of quantum mechanics. Video of my quantum mechanics series, which unfortunately is currently unfinished. Well, it didn't say it was unfinished, but what can I say? I've been busy doing actual physics. Well, again, that's just kind of a cop-out pussy statement, frankly. I mean, I'm making one of these videos a day. I don't do any preparation or anything else. I mean, if I want to explain something, it's pretty easy to explain it. You just explain it. You don't have to do it in some professional way. You could just do it in some way to convey it to other people, to say, look, this is how I understand it. Why can't you just do that? Why can't you just draw a picture of what you think the forces are and how they function? Anyway, I'll just try to answer as many of your questions as possible, time stamping the relevant parts of your video as I go along. I will try to keep maths to a minimum as YouTube is not designed for typesetting maths. Well, why do you even need to typeset them? I mean, they're just variables, right? So why use delta when you can just say, okay, the change in time or the change in this, and this dt, dv, dd, all this crap, when you're just really saying, no, just take a piece of a portion of the line, a segment, all right, and figure out how much energy hits that segment. And once you figured out how much energy hits that segment, you've really figured out how much energy hits the whole line. I mean, math isn't all that, okay? You people keep trying to make it all mysterious, and it's really not mysterious. The formulas have a basic, they're just basically pointing out, here's a set of variables, okay? These variables essentially control what you're going to find as the total energy of the system. I mean, it's not all that. And certainly you can explain it without actually doing the math. You can just explain why the variables are relevant. Okay. Let's see. The actual physics, maths. Okay, 2905. There is a huge amount of evidence that quantum phenomena are probabilistic. And again, I'm not denying that the results aren't come out as probabilities, but as I pointed out, I could do that with a clock. I could randomize how I view a clock based on something like how often I belch, or how often I stub my toe. And I'll look at the clock at exactly when I do that. And I'll get a probabilistic outcome. They'll end up being, oh yeah, you end up stubbing your toe more during the day than at night. Okay, for obvious reasons. it won't be. It's for a reason. It's not probabilistic for no reason. See, Feynman's quantum mechanics is basically saying the probability is built into the universe. The universe is rolling dice. He's basically saying that overtly. I think he almost said that exact kind of line. You don't like it, tough. That's what he says in one of his lectures. You don't like it, tough. He basically points out that Einstein said the universe doesn't play dice, and Feynman's basically saying, oh, yes, it does. All right, and what I'm saying is you have absolutely no evidence that the outcomes are being dictated by any kind of randomness in the universe. The outcomes are being caused because the atoms and the electrons and the protons are all involved in secular behaviors, and those secular behaviors will create probabilistic outcomes. Yeah. All right. Are probabilistic, and the mathematical structure of the theory is developed accordingly. So again, that's just mush. The mathematical structure is weak and imprecise, and that's just a fact. Again, why is the photon experiment, the pattern, very different than the electron pattern? So why don't you explain the difference between those two patterns? Electron pattern, very wave-like, on-off. Photon pattern, very much like just images, hard lines, bars. Why don't you explain why there's that difference? And explain how, if Huygens is true, why doesn't the double slit experiment create 4 wavicles? All right, accordingly. Let's see. This is not just Feynman's theory. In fact, it took Schrödinger and Heisenberg formulations of quantum mechanics to fully realize this. So again, that's your statement. Okay, you don't have any proof of any of that crap either. Heisenberg is nonsense, and again, Schrödinger is inaccurate, incomplete at minimum. At minimum, it's incomplete as a formula because clearly it doesn't account for the 2 patterns in the double slit experiment. Clearly it's missing something as a wave formula. Okay, water waves don't create 2 patterns, and for some reason photons do. Now I don't know what electrons do. I don't know whether electrons create both patterns. But you haven't accounted for the existence of the 2 patterns. That's called missing. That's not called hitting the target. That's missing the target. Fully realized. So you haven't fully realized anything. Possible you could clarify what you mean when you say it comes out as the law of averages. I'm just saying that anything that appears to be a probability is happening just like a roulette wheel or just like rolling dice. The variables are creating an apparent randomness, but there is no randomness. If you have enough variables, it'll be 1 o'clock on one variable and it'll be 6 o'clock on another variable. So any pattern will get broken by the number of variables, right? So the patterns will cross over each other and you won't have any pattern, okay, with enough variables. Or variables that are small enough in the sense that, the events on the atomic scale are happening, what takes 1 second in our world, in their world, if we were living at their speed, that would be 1 billion years. So 1 billion years of action is happening to an electron in the 1 second that we're observing. That kind of problem. And so it makes something that does have a pattern look like it doesn't have a pattern. Something that does have a cycle look like it doesn't have a cycle. Okay. Let's see. Possibly you could clarify. Okay. Yeah, well, so I don't know. What specifically do you mean by it? What I mean is the outcome. It comes out. Outcomes. Okay, outcomes. It's another word for that. The product, the event. Yeah, okay. All of those things are the it. All right, anyway. In quantum theory, when measuring an observable, see, this is all just such rubbish, right? We already know we can't measure these things. So measuring an observable, We already know we can't observe some things. We can't passively observe a photon. There's nothing of lesser energy that we can hit a photon with to observe a photon. Okay, so unlike a Volkswagen where we can hit it with tiny photons and see the Volkswagen, the only way we can see a photon is to plow another photon into it. So that's like saying I'm going to look at a Volkswagen by crashing a Volkswagen into a Volkswagen. Well, I'm not going to get a very good picture of the Volkswagen, am I? No, I'm not. So this whole concept of an observable is just nonsense talk. We can only deduce their function or their action based on what they cause as an effect. We can only see effects. We can't see the cause. Just a fact. We can't watch cause. We can only watch effect. Okay, say energy. It's not possible to predict exactly what the value you will measure. So again, you're attempting to measure something that's not, in my opinion, an observable or a measurable, because you can only measure it by watching something very big move. So it's like saying there's waves in the ocean, and you're going to watch one wave hit a giant steamship. Well, no, one wave isn't going to move the steamship. You're only going to see the steamship move if it gets hit by a whole bunch of waves. So there's minimums to what we can see. And we're not going to see the fine grain of it. We're not going to get the detail of it. We're just going to get laws of average. So again, that's what I mean by laws of average. You're going to get averages. You're not going to get the exact thing. So here you are saying, I'm going to say exactly what a photon is by measuring the action of an electron. Well, the electron has to get hit by a lot more than one photon for it to give you that action. So you're not seeing individual photons. You're seeing an average effect of photons. Clearly. All right. Let's see. Clarify. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry, I should leave the cursor where I'm reading. In quantum theory, when measuring an observable, say energy, it's not possible to predict exactly what value you will measure. But what I'm saying, there is an actual thing causing the effect. And the fact that we can't see it doesn't mean there's not an actual thing, an actual event, that photons do in fact have an actual velocity and an actual momentum, a direction, and this crap that because we can't measure it, we're going to pretend it doesn't, I say is crap. That's crap science. Even if you know which eigenstate of the Hamiltonian the system is in. So again, I'm not going to use mathematical jargon, but here I'm just going to throw in two huge mathematical concepts that are on thin Diracian ground. Eigenstates and Hamiltonians. These are abstract mathematical contrivances. They aren't real world things. However, given the state of a system, it's perfectly possible to work out the average of an observable. Again, so yes, you're working out the average. So again, you keep saying, okay, that somehow proves that there's no real events, because you're just going to say, I'm just going to look at the averages and say the averages are random. And I'm just going to assert. You have no evidence to draw that conclusion. You've jumped the evidence. The evidence doesn't say you need to create some law that says photons don't have any identity, that they don't have a specific place in space and time, that they don't have specific mass and specific velocity. You're just making that part up. Okay, observable quantity like energy. So again, this idea of what do you think energy is? In my theory, energy is simply understood. It's always motion. Motion is energy. So anything moving is energy. It's possessed by it. It owns it. It is functioning as something that has energy, because energy is essentially imbalance in a system. So whenever you imbalance a system, so you're sitting between planet X and planet Y, and you're equidistant from both these identical planets. Now you don't have any energy. There's nothing, you're not going to move either way. You're clearly being affected by a force, but the force is even, and so therefore there's no obvious energy. Okay, so I just move you a little bit one way, or I move you a little bit the other way, and all of a sudden you're going to keep moving. All right, you're going to have plenty of energy all of a sudden. Well, it's not that you got energy, it's that you moved to a location in space where you're going to get hit by more or less force in a certain direction. So the energy is in the force, the energy is in the stuff moving the speed of light. The matter is just being told what to do by the force. The force always dictates the motion of any material object. No material object has motion on its own. It has to eat the motion, has to consume it. The space shuttle needs to consume a force before the space shuttle can fly in space. It has to own it. All right, let's see. All right, Hamiltonian, blah, blah, blah. However, given the state of a system, it is perfectly possible to work out the average of the observable quantity like energy simply by summing over the, so here he goes again, eigenvalues weighted by their probability amplitudes. So again, we know a probability amplitude again is just that's again just saying I can see the effect. Okay, it doesn't have anything to do with causes. So again, this is just such much. So you really think that in the Newton's glass experiment, where where you do change the thickness of the glass and it changes its reflective index, you think it's just magical. You don't think there's an actual physical cause, that the atoms are actually changing, and that's what's changing the reflective index. You really don't think that it's plausible that the atomic structure changes when you confine the space that the atoms can exist in. Yeah. God, I pity you that you don't have enough imagination to realize there's physical causes for the outcome. The probability amplitudes. When you say probability is caused by something, it's not entirely clear what you mean by created. Well, cause and created. Probability is created. No, I don't say it's. I say it's caused. All right, it's an effect. The probability is an effect, and it has a cause, and the cause is physical. It's material. There's a real thing that happens. An electron moves because a force hits it. All right, that it doesn't move for no reason. All right, there's no gravity just makes electrons move. No, electrons have to be hit by a force moving the speed of light. And if there's more force hitting it from one side than hitting it from the other side, the electron moves. And of course it has to be the electron force. All right. Let's see. When you say probability is created by something, it's not entirely clear what you mean by created, but it's, in some sense, I can see why this is your intuition. It's not my intuition. I'm just not a religious kook. So are you saying it's intuition that I believe in evolution? No, I believe in evolution because every single fact points to it. Every single piece of real evidence points to it. And every single piece of real evidence of our universe points to no spooky action, no bullshit. Everything is clockwork reliable. Einstein was absolutely right. It's a clockwork universe. There's nobody playing any fucking dice. All right? Every little thing that happens has a cause. Newton was right. And for something to move, a force has to act on it. You want to break all of those rational rules and pretend that there's little magic bits that are affected by something called geometry or something. Somehow the photons, the electrons and the protons inside of atoms somehow know what their eigenstate is and say, oh, my eigenstate is wrong. I have to move towards the sun. And they just do it. No force pushes them. No action has to happen. It's all spooky fucking action. It's so ironic that Einstein is famous for saying spooky action when his theory of relativity is nothing but a spooky action theory. No energy involved. I mean, can't you? I mean, again, you're sincerely telling me that you don't see the cognitive gap, all right, in you people not having a source of energy for every action that happens in the universe. I mean, every single one of them. Because you don't have a mover for gravity, and you don't have a mover for magnetism. Two of the most important functions that take place in the universe, and you have no force. Virtual photon, Come on. You think that's a satisfactory answer? Virtual magiton. Because you don't even know how it's possible for your virtual photon to do attraction and repulsion. You have no explanation for it. None. Zero. Zip. Oh, man. Alright, however, given the state of a system, it's perfectly possible to work out the average of the observable quantities like energy. Okay, we did all that. Created. Alright. There is indeed a reason why, say, when you observe two-state system, again, two-state system, meaning what? I mean, what does that mean? Two-state? Oh, you mean constructive interference and constructive interference? What do you mean by two-state system? No system has just two states. You will find that the population vary over time. So again, I don't even know what that regards to, and clearly, what I did say in my response to you is show me evidence, show me experiments. All right, and I'll point out to you how your interpretation of the experiment is batshit stupid. Okay, that they all have rational explanations. It's just that none of you people ever looked for the rational explanation. Okay, and have a finite time period. Well, duh. So again, this is just jargon. Where quote anything I've argued for the existence of, like my theory for magnetism, and explain how it violates any of this crap. This falls readily out of the Schrödinger equation for the two-state system and time-dependent perturbation theory. So again, it's this word perturbation. You might as well say, why don't you admit you believe in an ether then? Why are you pretending anything else? What perturbation in what? What? A field? A field of what? I mean, you're just such... You don't see how that you're just such cheaters? I mean, you claim the existence of some magical entity. Okay, so you have a magical entity of bent space. You have some magical entity of the magnetic field. It doesn't do anything until it's perturbated. What does that mean? What is it then? Dominoes? What? What is this crap? Okay. It has nothing to do with the motion of particles as you suggest. Yes, of course, I'm the one who's pointing that out. You lie by calling it particle physics because none of you believe in particles. So it's just a big fucking lie. You call it particle physics. It has nothing to do with particles. You're perturbators. You're fucking perturbators. Alright, what you're seeing on screen and albeit not very artistic representation of time-varying wave function. So again, I'm just, well, look, what you're saying to me that your simulation has something to do with quantum mechanics. My only point is that what quantum mechanics and most of the experiments are demonstrating is that the probabilities are through a narrow range. Okay, they have like the two-slit experiment. There's 90% of the light is in the middle, then 10, and it goes down by a certain percentage at a very exact percentages. There's very regularness to it. There's nothing of this irregular crap. So you're showing a bunch of irregular action, which isn't really the definition of quantum mechanics, in my opinion, which is to understand that these are very regular probabilities. Again, the glass doesn't give you a random number as you polish the glass. You don't go, it's 8% reflective, and then it's 16% reflective, and then it's 4% reflective, and then it's 1% reflective. No, it goes through cycles. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 16, and then it goes through the cycle again. So it's very regular. A bunch of helter-skelter shit has nothing to do with quantum mechanics, in my opinion. Okay, when you say quantum mechanics has a consistent probabilities, it is again unclear what you mean. Well, I'm just restating what I mean. Is all the experiments demonstrate a very consistent kind of patterns are produced. The sine theta angle, for example, it's always a multiple of the original angle. 3 degrees, 6 degrees, 9 degrees, 12 degrees. There's not some irregularity in the pattern. It's multiples of something. But I will assume you mean to imply that it doesn't predict anything. So again, the stupid word predict. I mean, it's just idiotic, right? I mean, to watch a roulette wheel to figure out that, oh yeah, there's an even probability it goes in either one of these slots. I will now use my mathematics to predict the outcome. I don't need the mathematics to predict the outcome. I've already seen the outcome. So this is just such a bogus word to use, like somehow you have a crystal ball that's showing you something you don't already know. No, this is something you already saw. Okay, it's like me going to the showroom and looking at the new car. And then I walk out of the showroom and I tell somebody about it and say, I'm going to predict what the car looks like. Yeah, I just saw it. All right. Predicts constant probability amplitudes anyway. I'm saying there's always a consistency to these patterns. And that's the truth. This is not the case, and I would refer you to the example I mentioned previously on the two-state system. So again, what system are you talking about, the two-state system? What does that even mean? Pick an experiment that has two variables, two outcomes, two what? What do you mean by the two-state system? It's just such bullshit language. The analysis can be found in any QM textbook. So who cares? Again, so can the Copenhagen interpretation or the many worlds interpretation. Should I take any of that crap seriously? Lots of physics textbooks, QM textbooks, have Huygens in it. Do you really believe there's an infinite number of something in a confined space? So I have a 1 millimeter slit. You're going to tell me you actually believe there's an infinite number of little tiny waves flying out of that little tiny space? An infinite number. You believe that. You think that's reasonable to have an infinite number of something in a confined space. And you're giving me, you're being this arrogant to me when you're saying something that's just, might as well be saying there's aliens. You might as well just be saying you saw a UFO. I mean, you really don't understand how that's just too stupid an idea to even consider it possible. All right. For example, Griffin's Quantum Mechanics, Chapter 9, Section 9.1. So it's just more ambiguous nonsense. Why don't you just explain to me where in Griffin's book does he explain whether single photons interfere with themselves or whether different photons interfere with each other? In the interferometer, what happens? Does a single photon take both paths? Or do two different photons take two different paths and then interfere with each other later? Which is the reality? Does it say somewhere in your fucking quantum mechanics book, douchebag? Arrogant douchebag? No, I don't think it does. I do not mean it is not possible to develop a consistent theory. Probably the wording is unclear, but what I mean is that it is difficult to understand why the early developers of quantum mechanics made the postulate they did. Well, again, they didn't make any consistent postulate. Isn't that the whole point? Copenhagen, many worlds. You can't see how these are insanely divergent views of the fundamental mechanics of the universe. And once again, Feynman, one of the gods of quantum mechanics, overtly stated photons are particles and overtly basically stated Huygens is bullshit. And you people still sit there and say, we have the greatest theory, the most concise, the most predictive, the most rock solid theory in the universe, when clearly it's not rock solid. Clearly it's mushy as hell because your physicists can't even agree on what the words quantum mechanics mean. For example, why Planck decided to treat light as a quanta in order to solve the ultraviolet catastrophe. So again, there's no reason not to treat it as a quanta. It's obvious it's a quanta. There's no half a photon. Those things can be understood. All right, but that's not the question. The question isn't whether light is quantized. The question is, how does the quanta move? How does the quanta get from one place to another? And your theory is that it's perturbating in two different fields and doing all kinds of motion and all kinds of bizarre action, okay, that doesn't require any force to cause it. All right, for me to put a satellite in orbit, a bunch of gravity has to keep pushing the satellite, okay? There has to be a force acting on it. Well, I know you don't believe gravity's a force, but yes, a real force has to push it. It can't do circles without something confining it, something forcing it. Just like a physical, if I was to make a racetrack and tilt the race cars up and all that, I have to create a physical structure that causes friction. to confine, to force something to do something. I can't just pretend it does it. I can't pretend it just does this on its own. You have all this wacky motion in the universe and it doesn't exist. You're still drawing magnetic lines as if stuff is coming out of one end and stuff is being pulled into the other end. When Maxwell's equations, I think you as a mathematician know, his equations are basically just talking about a force that pushes in and pushes out based on those field lines. It's always perpendicular to the field lines, 90-degree angles. It's clearly a radial force. Has nothing to do with going in the magnet and coming out of the magnet. Damn it. All right, anyway. And so let's go back to these things, okay? So we're stuck with what Maxwell did, right? Maxwell discovered that the speed of magnetism and electricity was essentially the same as the speed of light. And so instead of thinking in terms of maybe light is a force like magnetism, they instead decided, no, let's make light into let's make light into a magnetic field perturbation. You know, so that was one of the critical mistakes. Second mistake, Einstein. Okay, Einstein makes this silly statement: all acceleration is the same. And so when he makes this silly statement, okay, then he's stuck with this idea that, oh, wait a minute, if I have the light clock in a rocket ship, the light's going to go down. It's going to look like it goes down because the rocket ship's going to move away from the light. The light's going to look like it goes down. So now I have to make light go down on the Earth. So now I'm going to have to make light get bent by gravity so I can make it look the same. And now I'm going to have to make it get bent twice as much by gravity because it's not going to bend enough. So, you know, so this is a stupid reason to create this whole theory that somehow photons are twice as affected by gravity than any other material object in the universe. Do you think that makes any sense, really? That there's only one thing affected more by gravity and happens to be the thing moving the fastest? I mean, doesn't that sound a little bit retarded to you? That the fastest thing is affected twice as much? Come on. By what metric do you deem experiments in quantum mechanics mushy? The metric is because the outcomes have not been explained. If you don't think it's mushy to have 3 different interpretations for what happens to a photon from the slits to the target, 3 different explanations, you don't think that's mushy. I think that's the definition of mushy. If you don't think it's mushy to propose that there's an infinite number of something inside a confined space, well, that sounds kind of mushy to me. You don't think it's mushy that you take a variable like the width of the slit, the width of the opening, and then in the next experiment the same variable is the width of an impediment. You don't think that's kind of mushy? I would argue, again, I can go back to the single photon versus multiple photons. The radar experiment, you're basically saying, I don't need any slits to interact with the radar, okay, so they don't get turned into a wave function, and somehow I'm just shooting from 2 antennas. I'm just shooting photons, and somehow, radar, the photons are interfering with each other by some magic. Just like if there were laser beams. How come I can't make laser beams do that? How come I can take radar photons and I can make them interfere with no slits involved at all, but I can't make a frickin' light ever do that? I can't take 2 light bulbs and make the light rays bounce off each other and interfere. Why can't I? You don't think that's mushy? Eddington said of his own experiment, I wouldn't stake my life on these results, in his own journal. And yet the New York Times publishes the headline, Einstein right. You don't think that's mushy or weak evidence? I would argue the design of the wavelength scale up to electronic devices, whatever, the prediction of the... So again, this word prediction, nothing was predicted by an equation. This is just such crap of the whatever this is, isotation energy of hydrogen. So again, more stuff like this is tunneling and all these other things. You've drawn conclusions about what's causing the effect. And in my opinion, your conclusions are just as bad as your interpretations of the 2-slit experiment. So if you say, oh, it's because of the the energy is tunneling through the protons in the nucleus or some other crap. There can be another explanation, because you really are clueless about how frickin' atoms work in the first place. Because I would argue we actually have no evidence that electrons are actually spinning around in an atom. No evidence for that at all. There's just no evidence they have any innate momentum. They're basically magnets stuck in positions. They're monopoles, okay, of the magnetic dipole. The electron is the negative monopole, the proton is the positive monopole, and the neutron is a dipole. I'm sorry, this is just such crap. All right, the Curie law of magnetic materials. Well, that one might be worth looking up. Because I don't think there's going to be any quantum mechanics in that. I betcha. What the fuck is this? Copying and pasting Google documents. These actions are unavailable. I mean, that's just fucking amazing. Google is such a cunt. Oh, Control C. I mean, what a pile of crap. Prediction of Rabi frequencies. Okay, so more predictions. So I haven't even heard of that. I mean, what could that possibly be? Oh, I have to do this stupid Control C thing. Oh, so stupid. Google. Alright, the list goes on. Yeah, I've already heard this list goes on crap. The experiments are endless, blah, 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 blah. And every time I go analyze an experiment, you see that it's full of crap. Alright, just like this stupid black hole thing, right? I mean, if somebody analyzes the manipulation of the data through all of these mechanisms, I mean, get real. I mean, where's the point where you've lost all resolution and they might as well just make it up? Alright, the list goes on. Bullshit. Are all great hallmarks of quantum mechanics? Well, yeah, hallmarks. Okay, then I guess then it's kind of strange that you won't be able to post me to a video of any talking head of physics or any lecturer, okay, at a big university, so Lewin or any of those people, talking about any of this crap. So you say these are the great things of quantum mechanics, and yet they don't teach it. They don't explain how it's so cool and so great. So why don't you link me to the talking heads pointing out how this is the real quantum mechanics? Because it's not what they talk about. Alright, are all great hallmarks, it calls them. Again, hallmarks that are never mentioned, that have been tested to great precision. So again, more crap about these fucking, it's just a complete exaggeration. Tested against what? You're just testing your theory against your theory. You're not testing it against anything real. Just like, you're just making it up. There's no way to measure, like, say, for example, the mass of an electron. There's no way to measure the mass of an electron, because all an electron is charge. Okay, its function is charge, and there's no way to interact with it except as charge. You can't interact with it as matter. Okay, there's no way to do it that way. It'll never, ever, ever allow you to make any kind of measurement of its mass, because its charge is what controls its motion. Alright, here are a few relevant papers. I doubt that they're going to be relevant. They're not going to answer any of my questions. So, but we'll go visit some of them. Oh, save to keep. Open link. So I can't open the link in a new window. I mean, it's just so obnoxious. Ugh. I can't copy the link either. I have to copy it. Actually copy it? Oh, fuck. I don't know if I really believe this guy that this comment was too long to post on YouTube. I mean, this is just such a pile of shit. Fucking YouTube is horse shit. I have a clipboard, so it all should be saved in my clipboard. So I'll go visit this shit later after well, maybe when I finish this. And then I'll do your duality video maybe next time. And we'll see what kind of crap you say about duality. Alright, well, actually, yes. There are numerous phenomena where the effects of quantum mechanics are observable on a large scale. So, again, more talk. There are none. So that's just crap. In fact, this video about the black body. So again, more crap that somehow you're claiming it's quantum mechanical, black body. No, it's just mechanical. There's no need for quantum mechanics anywhere in black bodies. All right, it just has to do with how the energy moves through atoms. And as atoms get hotter and hotter, they're obviously less and less stable. And so they're going to react more as electrons and protons. And they're going to be under more and more pressure, right? Heat is pressure. Can we agree on that? Heat is pressure. There's no way to have heat without causing more pressure. There's no way to have more pressure without causing heat. Can we accept those as definitions? Maybe. Let me see there's probably examples where you can certainly pressurize some atoms and they become more stable. Just trying to think. Yeah, like pressurized gases. But clearly they do cool on expansion. So the heat is still, the pressure is there, it's just not being, it's not escaping when they're in a canister. So when you have them under pressure, the heat, the pressure is in a stable form and it's not radiating it. But clearly it will when you expand the gas. You will consume heat from the environment. Alright, so I guess that's it, right? Let me see. Oh, there's some more. Here we go. Black body spectrum would not be the way it is, just classical physics taken into account. So again, says you. You're assuming what classical physics said. I mean, as I remember it, Newton made no, I don't feign an explanation. He didn't explain magnetism. He didn't explain gravity. He didn't explain what's causing these things. So again, you're presuming the cause. You're putting words in their mouths, so to speak, and saying this is what classical physics says is possible. No, a lot of this stuff classical physics doesn't have an explanation for because it doesn't know the causes. All right, and so one could argue that all of the speculation I've done is completely legitimate. So if you want to argue from my theory, that's fine. But to say that no classical model or no model except your quantum mechanics can explain, well, that's when you break reasonable law. Okay, so first I say you have no right to put words in classical physics' mouth in terms of imposing on them a theory they never argued for. They didn't have an explanation. That's why quantum mechanics could get invented in the first place, is because nobody had an explanation for anything. That's the whole reason why you start to accept silly theories, is because nobody had an explanation. And Feynman basically says it in his lectures. We're really smart. If we can't think of it, nobody can. I mean, that's how arrogant these people were. And so they basically gave up. Because they said, we're really smart and we can't figure out what causes any of this stuff, so we're just going to make up a bunch of crap as an explanation. Alright, so, yeah, so there's nothing about these spectrums that require any quantum mechanics. Alright, I think it's inaccurate to describe the general attitude of physicists at this time as let's give up. Oh, come on. Wave-particle duality. Virtual photon. Bent geometry. I'm sorry, that's giving up. In fact, it was far from it. Well, bullshit. That being said, it took the formalization of quantum field theory. So again, quantum field theory, as if there is such a thing, as if there's one consistent thing called quantum field theory, which there is not. So it's like saying string theory or something. This is just bullshit. To really understand how elementary particles, again, you don't believe in particles, so why are you calling them particles? Can have both wave and particle-like properties. Oh, I do have to play your wave-particle video. The fact that they can do things, okay, and something can look like, right? I mean, a platypus can look like a duck from a certain perspective, or it can look like a fucking raccoon, or it can look like a beaver. It can look like something from different perspectives. So what? We know it's not a duck. It's not a beaver. All right, 3220. No modern description of electromagnetism requires an ether. Well, I'm sorry. What does it require then? A field you're perturbating. You use the word perturbation, jackass, not me. That's your word. Perturbation in what? And I'll say it again. You're just you're just so duplicitous. You won't say you believe in an ether, but you'll create these wacky fields that exist, but they only exist as mediums for the transmission of perturbations. There's no real energy. Actually, one of the hallmarks of Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism, he didn't have a theory of electromagnetism. I'm sorry. He was an etherist, Maxwell. He didn't have a theory of electromagnetism. He had a fucking bunch of equations. Those equations have angles in them. Those equations don't have anything called a wave in them. Is that electromagnetic waves require no medium to propagate in. So again, this is just such nonsense. There's no energy. You can't, how can you do this crap with a straight face? You have no energy source. What is making the field? What's creating the field, idiot? Virtual photon. You don't think virtual photon is anything different than ether or any other kind of made up pile of crap? What the fuck is a virtual photon, and where the fuck did it come from? If the magnet isn't losing energy, and if the magnet isn't losing mass, where does the energy to move come from? Where does the energy that causes the movement come from? You have no explanation. Fuck. These people are in such fucking denial. Alright, anyway. Require no medium to propagate in. They can simply travel through the vacuum. No, they can't if they don't have a source. You have to have a source of the energy. You can't just say the magnet makes energy. That violates Einstein. You can't create it or destroy it. So where did it come from? You're amazingly you're an amazing cheater to talk this crap, that because Maxwell denied the just completely evaded the fundamental responsibility, and clearly Maxwell was an etherist. So again, this idea that he somehow believed in particles moving through empty space is nonsense. He did believe in perturbation, so let's not pretend he didn't believe in a medium. Alright, the magnetic and electric fields are not ethers in that they do not mediate the propagation of some other wave. Well, clearly that's exactly what you're stating they do. So that's just absolute nonsense. How is the photon moving through space as a perturbation without perturbating through a medium? I mean, this is just such nonsense. They are vector fields. Well, what does that mean, they're vector fields? Is that more virtual fields? That doesn't mean anything. We know what a vector requires. A vector requires something to stick. It requires a something. Something has to have the momentum. Something has to have the movement. Something has to be a moving. There are vector fields associated with a vector at every point in space-time. So again, there's no such thing as space-time, but whatever. Play in your little duty-covered sandbox. Duty-filled. Let's see. General relativity is far from useless. Well, again, I don't even think that's subject to any kind of interpretation. It's really not used for anything. Ever. Okay, I'm kind of shocked that I am having to provide a justification for it in this day and age, but okay. Solutions to EFE. Well, so, gee, that's just swell of you. I'm supposed to know what that means. EFE. Give us cosmological models. So again, more nonsense. Give us dark matter. Give us all kinds of other wacky crap that we only invented because our math didn't work. I mean, you're an amazing liar and a bullshitter to play this game. as if you have a cosmological model that makes any sense at all, when you goddamn don't. I mean, the universe big banged, and then a few days later, it expanded at 5 zillion times the speed of light. I mean, the whole thing sounds just such a fucking... It's worse than a Three Bears story. It's so preposterously nonsensical. Models to test and allow us to make predictions. Oh, so more of this bullshit about predictions. You don't predict anything but the outcome of your own bullshit. Just like your gravitational waves are just a fucking... You predicted that you can contrive a bunch of nonsense math. So why don't you explain to me where Einstein theorized that you can convert solar masses into bent space? Why don't you show me where that makes any sense at all? Not radiation, not any kind of real form of radiation, some sort of bent space. You can convert mass into bent space. Where? Where? In whose other brain but the asshole who came up with this nonsense? Where was it proven by somebody else? Where was it proven by any evidence, anywhere ever, that there's any such thing as converting solar masses into bent space? About the dynamics of the observable universe. The hallmark of observational cosmology is certainly the CMB, cosmic background. Right, and that only indicates to me it's clear evidence of the fact that you could have a particle theory of gravity that would be sourced by exactly the same source. So if there was a million times more energy that you can't see, just like we couldn't see radio waves before Hertz figured out how to see them. There was lots of energy we didn't even know existed. That's hitting us all the time. We didn't even know it existed. Now gravity could be exactly that. We just don't have any other way to measure it except for this way. Okay, we have no direct way to measure it, but it could be just exactly the same force coming from exactly the same location. Here is a paper on observable tests in cosmology. Yeah, I've already been through this crap, but whatever, fine. I have to debunk all of this crap for you. Also, almost forgot to mention gravitational waves. Yeah, exactly. Why don't you mention it, and then you can answer my questions. So answer my question. Where is there any multiple sources providing any reason to believe you can ever convert mass into bent space? Not mass into light, not mass into radiation, but mass into bent space. Why don't you show me where there's any indication that happens in the universe, except in the brain of the wackos who came up with this shit? There are a prediction of general relativity, so that's just a lie. Okay, recently confirmed at LIGO. So you're just going to talk absolute shit, is that it? Confirmed by what? Confirmed by what evidence? What? There's nobody took a picture of these gravitational waves. This whole interferometer, again, I've asked you serious questions. Why don't you answer my questions? How does the interferometer work? So at LIGO, do single photons take both paths? Or do different photons take both paths and then crash into each other later? And, if they're at LIGO, I think they actually do use half-silvered mirrors, to tell you the truth. When you use a half-silvered mirror, one path, the light's diverging through the whole path. You do know the difference, right? That the beam splitter doesn't create two even beams. One beam goes through tiny apertures and is diverging the whole trip, and the other beam doesn't get diverged till the last little length. So they're not equal beams. Do you have any way of accounting for that? The inverse square law is only a low energy approximation. Amazing. No, the inverse square law is exactly what Mach gravity produces. So why don't you look up Mach gravity, and then you'll realize that, oh yeah, that's exactly what would happen if I create a bunch of BBs going in all different directions, and I put a solid mass in there, and I put another solid mass in there. The two masses will be pushed right into each other by the inverse square law, by the random BBs. It's just so funny that he calls it an energy approximation. No, it's dictated by straight line force. Straight line force coming from an approximation of random directions creates the inverse square law automatically. In fact, general relativity predicts corrections to this. You can find information on this in Carroll's Space-Time and Geometry Chapter 5. Well, whatever. Why don't you answer my questions? Are my questions going to be answered in this stupid book? No. Because the book's a bunch of crap. Okay, the speed of light in a vacuum is constant in all inertial frames of reference, which doesn't mean anything. Okay, this inertial frame of reference is just such a pile of horseshit. And again, Einstein conceded that if I take a spaceship and it's moving half the speed of light, and I have a light clock going perpendicular to the spaceship, inside the spaceship, Einstein says the photon falls. Okay? Now, all you assholes arguing for relativity say that somehow the photon goes forward and bounces off mirrors and keeps on bouncing off mirrors. No, it doesn't do any of that crap. Alright, it doesn't double at all. So again, this is just ironic. Where did I say the speed of light doubles? What I said is Einstein doubled the effect of gravity on photons, just to make it possible to have light be observably bent by gravity. Eddington's experiment would be impossible without Einstein's gimmick. There'd be no way to observe it. The only way you can observe it, have any hope to observe the change, is because the fact that he doubled the amount of bending that a photon goes through. Alright, the speed of light in a vacuum is, okay, you're just so full of shit. There's no notion in general relativity where all acceleration is the same. Well, so again, why are you calling it general relativity then? Why are you calling it? Because that's not what Einstein said, okay? So clearly Einstein made the declaration that you can't see the difference between one acceleration and another, and another. It doesn't matter, make any difference. And the truth is that you can physically test. Because like the spaceship, okay, if you really could make a light clock that goes perpendicular and your spaceship is flying, you'll basically see the light fall, and that'll basically be a speedometer. The faster you're going, the more the light's going to fall, the more you're going to see it on the wrong place on the side of the ship. And you will know exactly how fast you're going, so you will be able to observe your acceleration and your velocity. More important, your velocity. Alright, there's no notion in general, whatever. Okay, same. And frankly, that statement doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm just saying that go talk to Einstein. There are not different kinds of acceleration. Well, clearly there are, in the sense that different kinds of forces can be producing. A magnet can accelerate another magnet. Now, I would argue that it's all the same force. It's all moving the speed of light, but you don't argue that gravity and magnetism are the same force, do you? You don't recognize that to be a truth, do you? But your conventional physics certainly doesn't. They think it's virtual photons versus bent space. They have two completely different explanations for the motion. So, I mean, how can you say this shit? How can you type this shit with a straight finger? I mean, you're just so full of shit. There are not different kinds of acceleration. Acceleration is the rate of change in velocity of a body. Yeah, we were talking about the causes of acceleration. Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't understand. We're talking about the causes of acceleration. Yes, obviously when something's moving. But my argument to you is nothing moves without a force acting on it, so you'll see the force pushing it, frankly. Yeah, I don't know how else to say this. I mean, the bowling ball doesn't roll unless somebody rolls it, you know. Actually, the predictions of the mathematics of the theory agree very well with experiment. Says you. Let's take the case of the double slit experiment. Well, good, but you'll fail on that experiment completely. You can show in a couple of different ways that the bright fringes occur at angles theta. Yeah, exactly, at angles. At angles. Which satisfy sine theta. Yeah, so what? So again, this is amazing. Yeah, I'm arguing. So you're saying that somehow you paid some attention to my theory? Well, my theory explains it as angles, idiot. I've already provided an explanation for the double slit experiment that has to do with a mechanical explanation that involves photons hitting electrons, not magitons turning into wave functions. All right, anyway. And wavelength of the light, distance between the slits. So again, it's not the distance between the slits. So you got that part wrong in the sense that in the single slit experiment, it's just the width of the slit. In the double slit experiment, it's the width of the impediment, where n is an integer. Yeah, we know all that crap. I've got like 50 at least double slit experiment videos on this channel. You don't think I know this shit, shithead? This can be investigated and verified done in almost any high school. So again, and I did exactly that. You know what I also did? I put a bunch of dirt, moisture, on a plain piece of glass and ended up with the exact pattern you get from an interferometer. Yeah, no need for photons to interfere with themselves. All you have to do is have a dirty piece of glass to create a nice Newton's ring. Oh, God. Amazing. So again, you're just not going to pay any attention to my questions on the double slit, right? Why is the electron pattern gradual on and off? Why is the photon pattern clear bars? Why, in a diffraction gradient, does it send actual images to the locations? Actual images of exactly what went in to the gradient. So implying that the double slit's doing that also. If 7 slits are creating images, why wouldn't you think 2 slits are also creating images? And that what you're seeing, what those bars are really just images of the surfaces. Why don't you explain how that can't possibly be the answer? Actually, there are solutions to Schrodinger's equations which reproduce the interference pattern for particles scattering off a double slit. Scattering off of a double slit? Does that make any sense to anybody? I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, I'll copy these. There's 2 links here. Yeah, I guess there's 2 different links. Again, so what do you think? I'm disputing the existence of the double slit experiment? I mean, you really haven't followed along at all, have you? And you're clearly not explaining the problems with your mathematics, the fact that your mathematics doesn't predict what the actual outcomes are. Alright, actually both the single and double slit patterns can be fully explained by treating light as an electromagnetic wave. Bullshit. The electric field at the screen is given by the Fourier transform, and the aperture function, which then applied to both cases predicts the correct interference pattern. Says you. Huygens' principle is really just a way of physically picturing, there's no physical picture in Huygens, what the Fourier transform is doing. So again, what is your model then? Why don't you draw me a picture? You're saying that you have this non-ether, that somehow real particles are moving, but then you say, no, there's not real particles. Draw a picture of it. Because frankly, it doesn't make any sense. You can't keep claiming it's one thing, then it's another thing, then it's another thing. Now, Huygens is now not real. Huygens is just a fake. And the real thing is Fourier transforms. Well, what do they look like? Oh, this is just such crap. Although I would say your interpretation of it is not correct to say the least. Well, yeah, that's to say the very least. You didn't make any kind of counter-argument. Absolutely none. You haven't explained how it can't be true. You haven't pointed me to a single experiment that shows it can't be true. So you're just bullshit. Alright, just because an object is at equilibrium does not mean it's a perfect black body. Well, if it's at perfect equilibrium, it does, but whatever. So in fact, no, black bodies are all over the place. Says you. Jargon, bullshit. Everything achieves equilibrium for a period of time. Yes, because time can be cut into little tiny pieces. If I drive a semiconductor device with a strong current indefinitely, it will be at equilibrium. So where did I say that? I didn't say you can't burn something up. I didn't say you can't hydrogen bomb something. All I stated is that things, okay, as they plow through environments, tend to achieve equilibrium. That is, they warm to the temperature of the thing they're in. They condition to their conditions. That's all. There's that tendency. I didn't say it was a rule. I didn't say it was a law. I just said an awful lot of, like, my keyboard is the same temperature as my desk. You know, that kind of thing, retard. God, you're such an asshole. Alright. If I set an SHO in motion, it is in equilibrium. So again, just taking everything to preposterous extreme, I just made the point that most things, for most of their existence, are at equilibrium. That's all. Alright, 3607. What if it's not at a frequency? What if it's too low or too high? All free electromagnetic radiation has a given frequency. So again, that's your notion that it has a consistent frequency, number one, and that you can somehow detect it when you can't. We already know that our eyeball can't detect, it has to have a whole stream of photons before our eyeball says it's a one photon, right? I mean, we can't see a single photon, so to speak. We already know that. And the same could be true for a photomultiplier. We don't know how much energy it takes exactly for an electron to move enough to cause a cascade in a photomultiplier. We have no way of knowing it. We just say it's 1 because that's the lowest number we can count to, because that's the closest we come to the smallest amount of energy. But we don't know the tipping point. And that's when you get into all this spin nonsense, because you don't know the tipping point, so you think there's something called spin. And no, spin just means how much pressure is the electron under. Anyway, you cannot give a periodic wave with no frequency. No, but you can have an inconsistent frequency. Okay, you could have photons traveling where it's just, it's 400 nanometers, and then it's 100 to the next one, and then it's 700, and then it's 300, and then 6, and there'd be no way to really detect it because we wouldn't be collecting enough frequency in a row to be able to identify it. So we would be unidentifiable, just like a radio signal. If you got a radio signal that changed frequency with each photon, you wouldn't be able to tune it in. So you'd think no energy was there, when there was a ton of energy there. You just can't tune it in. As I stated, black bodies emit radiation at all frequencies, the proportion of which depends on the temperature. Yeah, okay, so what? I'm just claiming there's nothing quantum mechanical about the real cause. Electromagnetic radiation is not gravity. Well, says you. Okay, light, magnetism, and gravity are all the same thing. It's traveling the same speed, and it's just in a different form. When it's at a frequency, we call it a photon. When it's polarized, for electron force versus proton force, we call it charge and magnetism. And when it's neither of those things, okay, and it's called gravity. When it's not polarized and not at a frequency, it's gravity. Alright, so you're just making a declaration, again, that you haven't proven. You have weak evidence for your theory of gravity. Again, bent space. That's not an explanation. Where's the energy come from? The Earth is moving towards the sun. What is moving it? What is telling the atoms of the Earth, the atoms in my body, that they have to move a little bit towards the sun all the time? What's telling them to do that? What's making them do that? Why do they not go on their course, their momentum course, and why instead do they turn? What force acted on them? You don't have one, and you're this arrogant. Alright, let's see how much more of this there is, because I'm getting a bit tired. I mean, you did type a lot of crap. I'll give you credit for that. You type. Boy, a lot of typing. Alright, so yeah, but I'm getting a bit tuckered, so maybe we'll call this a day and come back to this tomorrow. But clearly you haven't you've done your cursory review of my arguments. And clearly you don't understand how deeply I've gone into the two-slit experiment. Again, I've played Professor Lewin, I've played Feynman, I've played Susskind, and I've played the guy at Yale. And they all talk shit on the subject. And they draw shit on the subject. Alright. Yeah, so we'll come back to this. So I'm at 3643. Okay, well, electromagnetic radiation is not gravity. That's where I am. Okay, so till the next time, and such, and so forth and whatnot. So this is productive. Because, I mean, it's a lot of subjects, though. And clearly this whole idea that I have to go to these links and demonstrate how that's just your interpretation of the causes of the effects. Again, all these experiments, right? All the experiments about entanglement, 90% of them are done with polarizing filters. And yet, physicists really don't have a good theory of how polarization, especially light polarization, works. They don't have a good explanation for why, you put two cross filters and then you put a third filter in at an angle and all of a sudden you're getting light. And the obvious deduction from that experiment is the middle filter each filter must be turning the light. The light that gets through must be being changed. The only way that extra filter could work is it must be changing the photons that get through. It's not just passively measuring, it's actively changing photons. Clearly, you can't use polarization filters as passive measuring tools because they do affect the photons. They're not passive. But I made this point over and over again. It's just deaf ears, man. You people are just so fucking deaf to reason. Alright. Now, until next time. And such.